Welcome to episode 5, part 1 of the Blue Skies Private Pilot Crash Course, where we'll be going over the structure of the FAR AIM, how to read it, and about half the sections you need to be familiar with. The rest will be gone over in part 2, because this is a fat book. In aviation, you are going to find a lot of things that you are going to love and a few things that you just don't really. For me, I love the views, I love the trips, and I kind of like studying the regulations, to be honest. It's uncommon for that to happen. Many students really throw out the regulation studying, not because it's not exciting, but typically $100 cheeseburgers and doing maneuvers are way more exciting than reading a little book, so I don't exactly blame them. But you have to admit though, it is really interesting to think that the only regulations that existed for the Wright brothers were don't kill anybody and try not to die. That's a little bit fun, huh? But every single rule in this big book was either lobbied and voted in, or one person just screwed up so bad that they had to write down not to do that one thing. There's a lot of rules in here like that. Grab your book, grab something to take notes with, because you're going to need them. You're going to need to study all of these. And let's get started.
So, FAR AIM stands for Federal Aviation Regulations / Aeronautical Information Manual. This is all from the U.S. Department of Transportation from Titles 14 and 49 of the Code of Federal Regulations, shortened for CFR. To be able to read the FAR AIM in its entirety for free, the FAA has a website tagged in the description with all the most updated regulations, so you don't necessarily have to read and buy this entire massive book every single year. That is my job. For your convenience and your exams, I strongly suggest getting one of these physical copies as well and taking note of where the most important information is, like I've done here. You can go to a bookstore and hope that they have one. You can go to a pilot store and definitely grab one, or you can click the link in the description to get one off of Amazon. There are also a handful of apps to check out there. I never really bought or used any of those because I got the website and the book, and they're just easier to use for me. But if you're the kind of person who wants an app, those do exist. No matter how you do it, you need to know how the book is organized and what information it contains. So if you have a question, you know the best place to look to find your answer. The beginning of the FAR AIM has a section starting on page that is 17, but in Roman numerals right here, actually 18, suggesting the material you should study according to the certificate you are trying to go for, and make it way easier on the students. Actually, it does start Roman numeral 17 for your sport pilot, but you're not necessarily going to want that. You're going to want your private pilot or recreational. Remote pilot is also easy. That's for like the UAVs or the SUAS. And yeah, it's going to make it way easier just to look at this first. Just so you know, the FAR AIM is divided into two parts, the FAR and the AIM. The FAR is where you're going to find all of the actual legally binding regulations for aviation operations in the United States, all the way through the NTSB parts. And then the next part is going to be the AIM. It provides non-regulatory guidance and information on the various aspects of aviation. This is where you're going to find how to properly do things like communicate with air traffic control. Not necessarily legally binding, but it's something that you really need to know for your flights. A ton of IFR information and how to fill out a flight plan is also going to be in the AIM section, and it's just going to be written a little bit more like a book and less like a big book of laws. They're separated into chapters, and you're going to want to check out all of these chapters at minimum before you could go take your written, practical, and oral exams. The FAR is divided into titles, then subchapters, then parts, then subparts, then individual regulations, each addressing specific areas in aviation such as general operating rules, airworthiness standards, pilot certification, and even more. So if I were to look for a regulation like the one that outlines the knowledge requirements you need to cover for the private pilot written exam, I would look at Title 14, which is in the book, and you're going to be looking for most of your information in 14. You check the table of contents for the subchapter on airmen, which is over here. That's going to be certification and pilots, flight instructors, ground instructors, all that jazz. And so we are going to go over to subchapter D, and it has a certification of pilots at part 61. Subpart D, this is all recreational pilot information. We should be right over here. Private pilots eligibility requirements. It is easiest to just put a note and flip right back to this and decide it on an exam or a pilot. Or for a lawyer, you need to write it down as 14 CFR section 61-105. You will then put a parentheses over any specific part in the regulation you want to cite. So if you want to cite all the aeronautical knowledge areas or just be in the regulation, I would add a B at the end of it. So it would actually read out 14 CFR section 61.105 B. That should be 105 and B, aeronautical knowledge areas. This is all the information that you need to find a regulation as well. For example, if out of curiosity you want to read 14 CFR section 91.17 from the beginning, you can start off by grabbing the book, going to part 91, flipped right to that. Oh my gosh, it's like muscle memory. And general operational flight rules, designated page, bam. So 91.17, we are on 501, so we're going to have to go way back. 17, and that's on alcohol and drugs. No person may act or attempt to act as a crew member of a civil aircraft within 8 hours of consumption of any alcoholic beverage or while under the influence of alcohol. So if you did exactly what I just did, you'll find the alcohol and drugs regulation, and I can guarantee people were pissed once this regulation was introduced. Just as you are not allowed to drink and drive, the same is true for drinking and flying. Except, of course, the FAA has to work more thoroughly and strictly than the DMV. So that being said, if you get a DUI, you lose your driver's license and your pilot's license. Just a little bit of information that you're going to want to know. So don't drink and fly or drink and drive, or you're going to lose both your licenses. While flying, you better know that the alcohol restrictions are twice as tight than driving restrictions. Literally. If you are over 21 years old, you must wait 8 hours, just as we said in the beginning, which is twice the normal for driving, which is about 4. That's all since your last drink to fly legally. An easier way to remember it is 8 hours bottle to throttle. Furthermore, you must also have a blood alcohol content of less than 0.04 BAC, which is right here, while having an alcohol concentration of 0.04 or greater in the blood or breath specimen. That's under the alcohol section, and there we go. The parts of the FAR AIM recommended to study the most for your exam are section CFR 14, Part 1 definitions, Part 21 procedural rules, Part 39 airworthiness directives, Part 43 maintenance and preventative maintenance, Part 61 that covers pilot certification and privileges. We also have Part 68 basic med. We have Part 71 airspace, Part 73, Special Airspace, Part 91, that covers the general operating and flight rules, and we're going to have a lot of emphasis on this on Part 91. And then we're going to have 49 CFR, which is just NTSB notification, Part 830, going over that one in depth, and then we got to read all of the AIM chapters. That list is intimidating, but don't be intimidated. Since you have been following this course, you've already gone through a ton of it, and we might just be pushing back some of that stuff like the airspace for other chapters because it just fits in a little bit better. But let's go ahead and crack into this a little bit more. As a private pilot, it is your responsibility to know what the rules are, what they say, and what they mean, and not to break any and all of the regulations outlined in the FAR/AIM. This video is meant to be a store for all of the federal regulations that will not be thoroughly explained in any other video. So I think a great spot to start at is Part 1, which is definitions. We will move over to Part 61, which is basically privileges, certification of pilots, flight instructors, and ground instructors. And then we will spend a good chunk of our time talking about Part 91, which is general flight rules, general operating, and flight rules, as there's a ton of definitions that won't fit well anywhere else in the series, and we will end off with some information on the NTSB, also known as the National Transportation Safety Board notification information. So as a little preface, I recommend reading through all of these chapters by yourself after finishing this course, given how much information is included. I didn't know how much there was until I was studying to be an instructor, and I really regret waiting so long. So let's go ahead and start with Part 1. Part 1, as I said earlier, has a ton of definitions and abbreviations. So let's not waste any more time going over the ones you need to know for your exam. For starters, an aircraft is a device that is used or intended to be used in flight in the air with respect to airman certification. There are 5 different broad categories used to classify aircraft with respect to airman certification. These categories are airplanes, gliders, rotorcraft, which is basically a helicopter, lighter than air aircraft, which are blimps and hot air balloons, and then there's powered lift, which are these things. Your pilot's license allows you to operate one or more of these categories, but having a private pilot's license does not mean you're certified certified to fly all of them. Choosing between a category of aircraft is like choosing between a motorcycle driver's license, a car driver's license, or a boating license, really. Aircraft are then divided into different categories within these categories, which we call classes. There are a handful of classes of aircraft per category. The airplane categories are single engine land, which is abbreviated to SEL, multi-engine land, MEL, single engine C, SES, and then multi-engine C, MES. The rotorcraft categories are helicopter, gyroplane, and lighter than air. Categories are going to be airship and balloon. Weight shift control aircraft category are just land and sea. We then have powered parachute categories, land and sea, and choosing a class of aircraft is more like choosing between a sedan or truck. Within these classes, there are make and models of which, once you have your private pilot's license, you can legally fly as long as they are within your class and category, with some exceptions, endorsements, and type ratings. The last way some special aircraft are legally categorized with regards to airman certification is type. This is like getting special permission from the DMV to drive a car, like with a Chevy Camaro with a jet engine installed into it. If the aircraft you want to fly is over 12,500 pounds, has a turbojet power plant, or is otherwise specified, then you will also need to earn a type rating to act as pilot in command. A PIC from now on is basically the captain of the ship. Unfortunately, he or she cannot marry people as PIC. I checked and I was very disappointed. PIC has the final authority and responsibility for the operation and safety of the flight and must hold the appropriate licensing, category, class, and rating if appropriate to conduct the flight. Examples of a rating on a pilot's license are type and instrument. There will be more on both of those things soon. We already went over type, but what's an instrument rating? An instrument rating is given to a pilot who has a private pilot's license and then earns permission to fly in IMC, which is Instrument Meteorological Conditions, under IFR, which is Instrument Flight Rules, as opposed to VFR, Visual Flight Rules. Later we will go over exactly what is defined as IFR and VFR, but for now, VFR is when you can maintain separation from other aircraft by seeing them and control your flight while being able to see the horizon. IFR is when ATC has to help you out with their special radars to maintain separation while you keep the flight controlled with only your instruments to help you. The last pertinent definition is every weird way aviators define nighttime. Lots of regulations require everyone to agree on when nighttime is, so as a pilot, you need to know what nighttime is. And by aviator definition, it is the time between the end of evening civil twilight and the beginning of morning civil twilight. Civil twilight is a very specific term that refers to the time when the sun's center is 6 degrees below the horizon, which varies according to where on the planet you are, so you need to use a very special calculator to be able to figure out when that time is properly to log time. If you use the calculator, you will find that morning civil twilight is about half an hour before the sun rises, and that evening civil twilight is about half an hour after the sun sets. Please thank me for all that information. It is terribly hard to find all that specific stuff. It gives you that beginning definition in part 1, but a lot of that is not found here. This is the time you can log in your logbook as nighttime, which is important for getting and keeping your pilot's license. Before we move on to part 61, there is one thing you have to remember about nighttime regulations. It just makes it easier to keep it all in one place. So in order to carry passengers during the period beginning 1 hour after sunset and ending 1 hour before sunrise, which is another kind of nighttime, you need to log 3 takeoffs and 3 landings to a full stop within the last 90 days during that period as PIC. If you want to fly passengers during the day, you must have made the same amount of takeoffs and landings, which is 3 and 3, but the landings are only required to be a full stop, so they can just be touch and goes, unless you were flying a tail dragger. So in a tail dragger during the day, it would have to be full stop during the day. Alright, no more definitions, onto the niche rules. Parts 21, 39, and 43 are all about aircraft, and the FAR-AM only suggests studying a total of 3 regulations between 21, 39, and so we're going to be going over those right now. It's not actually in this book. You're going to have to look at the online version. So let me just give you those. These 3 regulations are Section 21.181, Section 21.190, and Section 39.3. Section 21.181 describes how long airworthiness certificates are valid, and it is basically when it is issued, which is once it is approved for one, and until it is no longer safe to fly, which can mean forever or until the certification was written by the certifier to expire, like in the case of a special flight permit or an experimental certificate. Section 21.190 explains issue of special airworthiness certificate for a light sport category aircraft. Go here if you're an owner of a light sport category aircraft looking to get your private pilot's license. That has all the information that you're going to need for the airworthiness of that light sport category aircraft. Then we have Section 39.3. Section 39 is all about advisory directives, or ADs. The definition of an airworthiness directive is FAA's airworthiness directives are legally enforceable rules that apply to the following products: aircraft, aircraft engines, propellers, and appliances. They're basically just added on rules to anything and anyone, really. Just you need to get it checked out whenever they want you to check it out. So it's legally binding. Good luck, have fun, be safe. Section 43 is all about maintenance, and here we are. Maintenance, preventative maintenance, rebuilding, and alteration. What you need to know is that unless you are certified or licensed to work on an aircraft, you legally cannot, unless it is considered preventative maintenance. So you cannot rebuild, you cannot alter, and you cannot maintain an airplane unless you are an AMP or a mechanic certified on airplane maintenance, rebuilding, and alteration. Preventative maintenance, what you are allowed to do is limited to simple and small operations, including replacing or installing landing gear tires, servicing landing gear, replenishing hydraulic fluid. We have refining decorative surfaces, replacing safety belts, fixing circuits in the landing light, cleaning spark plugs, servicing batteries, etc. A lot of things. Once preventative maintenance has been done, the person who completed the maintenance legally must enter the signature, certificate number, and kind of certificate held by the person approving the work and a description of the work having been done. Awesome! Now we can move over to Subchapter B, Part 61, which is regarding certification of pilots, flight instructors, and ground instructors. Lots of rules. Part 61 is all about those people. If there is a license you want, a roadmap is in here for you to earn it. There are also just as many ways for you to lose your certification. Let's go through them all. Why not? We have Section 61.3, which is right here. Requirement for certificates, ratings, and authorizations. To act as pilot in command of an aircraft, you must always physically have your pilot's license, your government issued ID like a passport or a driver's license, and your medical certificate. The medical certificate comes in 3 different flavors, and it is obtained from the one exam you don't actually have to study for. That is your medical exam, where you go to an AME, which is an aviation medical examiner, and he makes sure you do not have any physical or physiological problems that would compromise safety in an aircraft. That brings us over to 61.23, which is regarding medical certificates. Right there. If you are currently flying to learn or for recreation, you want the first flavor, the 3rd class medical, which lasts for 36 calendar months if you are under 40 years old, and 24 calendar months if you are over 40 years old. If you are flying for commercial purposes, you want a 2nd class medical, which is valid for 24 calendar months. If you are a captain for an airliner, you want a 1st class medical, which is valid for 12 calendar months. Once a higher level medical expires, like the 1st class, you can go ahead and use it as the lower level. For example, if you have your 1st class medical for 12 calendar months, you can still use it as a 2nd class medical for 12 more calendar months for a total of 24 calendar months. But Brad, why do you keep saying calendar months? Just say months. Why don't you? What the heck? Well, I'm glad you asked. The reason is because months and calendar months are actually different things. You know what a month is. If I said on 6/20, my birthday is in a month, you know I mean 7/20. A calendar month is different in that the countdown for a calendar month does not start until the end of the month. So if some psycho, probably a Leo, came up to you on 6/20 and said that their birthday is in one calendar month, then they mean 7/31. So So this following logic and the information that if you are under 40 years old, a third class medical is valid for 36 calendar months. If you obtain the medical on June 20th, 2023, it would expire on June 30th, 2026. In an earlier video, I believe I explained that you need a written endorsement from a certified pilot instructor to fly a high-performance airplane, an airplane having more than 200 horsepower. This regulation is Section 6131 right here, which is going over type ratings, and it pertains to all of the varieties of airplane you need extra training for, including type ratings received from a pilot examiner, just like a license after completing the exams. We have complex airplanes, an aircraft that has retractable landing gear, flaps, and a constant speed propeller. This requires an endorsement from a CFI along with ground and flight training. Tailwheel airplanes, basically the same thing as explained before. It is an aircraft that has 2 tires in front and 1 on the tail, hence the name. This requires an endorsement from a CFI along with ground and flight training. Same with a pressurized aircraft. A pressurized aircraft is an airplane that has a service ceiling or maximum operating altitude above 25,000 feet MSL, above mean sea level. This requires an endorsement from a CFI along with ground and flight training. The aforementioned high-performance aircraft requires an endorsement from a CFI along with ground and flight training, just like the other two. Here's some bad news to note. Even if you promise to not use the landing gear or over the 200 horsepower that you have in the plane, you still need to log ground and flight training and get the endorsement before you can be pilot in command of any of these kinds of aircraft. We're going to go ahead and skip over to section 61.56. Looking at the top right, we need to go a little bit farther, and 5.6. We're going to be talking about flight reviews, which is a reminder that pilots should always keep learning and stay current in their aviation knowledge. This regulation states that your private pilot's license gives you PIC privileges, or pilot in command privileges, for 24 calendar months. I told you. So your privileges expire after this time frame unless you complete one of 3 things. First thing is going to be a flight review, 1 hour minimum of flight training and 1 hour minimum of ground training by a CFI reviewing flight rules, specifically Part 91, getting to that soon. And maneuvers or accumulated wings credit from the FAA Wings program to equal 1 flight review would also be good in place of a flight review, or you could have passed a practical exam for a new license that is above the license that you have, or rating, and that's about it. Once you pass that, you don't exactly need a flight review for your license. We can go ahead and go on to 57, which is right here, which is recent flight experience. It's all about the recent 3 takeoffs and 3 landings, passenger regulation that we've already talked about, and instrument experience and proficiency. Section 61.60 lets you know that if you change your address, you must notify the FAA within 30 days. We can go ahead and talk about subpart B, aircraft ratings and pilot authorizations, 61.63. It explains that you need to pass a practical exam and earn a logbook endorsement, not in that order specifically, for any new aircraft ratings, like you started flying helicopters after you earned a PPL for airplanes. What you would love to know is, if you are licensed in any category or class of aircraft, you only need to pass the practical and oral exams. The written exam is one and done. Section 61.65 is all of the instrument rating requirements. We will go more into detail once we have an instrument course, of course. Lots of these regulations are extremely niche. That's why I recommend reading them, but we will be skipping to the next applicable section, which is subpart C, which is all over student pilots, which is, I assume, you, or unless you're a CFI reviewing, it's not you. Sorry. And here we go. Student pilots. Starting off with a little picture of me and a day I remember very well. When I was flight training at 19 for my private pilot certificate, I was really bad at landing, and everybody knew it. But that was the last maneuver I had to get down before I could fly alone in the plane as a student. It was a clear, bright Friday, as you can see, and I just got out of my last college class and had 2 hours to practice my landings before I went to work in fast food. I took my flight instructor up for some laps in the pattern, and after 3 good landings, he told me to drop him off and do 3 more on my own. Once my CFI made sure I had him as the sole beneficiary of my life insurance policy, I taxied to the hold short line on runway 26, told the tower I was ready to fly in a pattern as part of my first solo flight. It sounded a little bit like this. Tower, Cherokee, Bravo Romeo Alpha Delta, holding short of runway 26 for close traffic. I think I should let you know this, since I'm trying to be a little safe. This is my first solo as a student pilot. There was a little bit of a pause right after that, and someone on the frequency butted in on the communication to congratulate me. I was still on the ground at 70 feet ASL, but I felt like I was on top of the world because of that one congrats someone butted in. Before I could thank that random voice, ATC responded with, Cherokee, Bravo Romeo Alpha Delta, tower clear for takeoff, runway 26 for left closed traffic, no delay. I'll explain more of that radio communication with some more examples in a future video. All you have to know is, for this story to make sense, no delay is ATC for hurry the fuck up. We don't have all day. My first landing sucked. I hit the ground too hard and couldn't keep on the center line for shit. Really. So I went for the second one, but that first landing got on my nerves, so I did a go around. I used the next few minutes in the pattern to calm down and pick apart what I was doing wrong to fix it. It was a beautiful day, and the next two landings were butter. I called my parents, told them a whole story, and as soon as I hung up on them, I called out of work. I had enough sick hours. You're gonna have a beautiful day like this soon, but you have to put in the study time and the work. And section 61.81 all the way through 87 has all of the work laid out for you. As a student pilot, what I had to do and what you will have to accomplish is a written knowledge exam made by your CFI and received the ground in-flight instruction on all the maneuvers required to fly in a plane by yourself, or whatever aircraft, helicopter you're soloing in. After your flights, you can actually take this regulation and start checking off the maneuvers you have learned on how to do effectively. Once you're signed off, you can fly the specific make and model of aircraft your CFI specifies. If you do not earn your PPL before the 90-day anniversary of your solo endorsement, you'll need to receive another written endorsement for more solos. You will also need a separate endorsement to fly at night as a student pilot, just so you know. You have many more restrictions as a student pilot than you will as a private pilot, which is logical. You're trying to earn that bigger license. According to 61.89, this all includes general limitations. It includes the limitations you would have as a private pilot: no carrying property for compensation or for hire, no flying for hire, and no flying in furtherance of a business, along with extra stipulations since you are still a student. You can't fly internationally, no flying without reference to the ground, like over a big fog layer, can't fly with less than 3 statute miles of visibility during the day, and no less than 5 statute miles at night. You can't fly with passengers except for your CFI, and your CFI can add any extra limitations they deem worthy. Since I sucked at landing, my instructor said I wasn't allowed to fly with a crosswind component of more than 10 nautical miles. And the limitations listed in 61.93 are all cross-country restrictions. Being able to complete your first solo cross-country is another milestone that I remember well, but it's more of because of all the mistakes I made during it, and I'll be keeping those to myself. Until you have the proper flight and ground training endorsement, you will also have these restrictions, which is a 25-mile leash on your solo flights from your airport. You can only land at your airport unless endorsed for another one by your flight instructor. You have to have your solo flight plans reviewed by your flight instructor, as you should. You know, that's a little bit logical. You need to remember, even while you're on a solo flight, you're flying under your flight instructor's license, meaning if you screw up, you and your CFI are both going to suffer consequences. Now that you are enlightened on how many restrictions a student pilot has compared to a private pilot, let's go over again the requirements to get your PPL. That's all going to be in section 61.103, which is literally the page that I just skipped over. That's great. I love it. There we go. Private pilots, and 103 is right here. To be eligible for your PPL, you must be at least 17 years old, be fluent in English. There are workarounds for this if you cannot speak due to medical reasons. Actually, I just learned about that too. You need to receive a logbook endorsement from an instructor that has conducted and reviewed your training, that you are ready for your written knowledge exam. You need to pass your written knowledge exam and do the same thing with your practical and oral exams. You must hold a U.S. student pilot's license, and this can be subbed with a sport or recreational pilot's license or certificate, but a student pilot is the easiest certificate to get. You must also meet aeronautical experience requirements, which is 61.109, and have them all in your logbook. They are all right here. Awesome. Beautiful. So right here through here, unless you're a multi-engine, then you look down here as well. Once you have graduated from student pilots to private pilots, you can now exercise the privileges and limitations of a private pilot. Your privileges are flying without supervision from a CFI, which is a lot of people's favorite, and carrying passengers in the category and class and type if and endorsed if required. What you can't do is fly for more than your pro rata share of any flight, meaning if you and your friend go flying, 2 people in total, the fuel, oil, airport expenditures, and rental fees all come out to $100, which is really cheap. For the flight, you have to pay $50 or more. If you then fly 4 people in total, including you, and the cost is the same, $100, you must pay $25 or more. If you pay less than that, you are breaking a regulation, and should any FAA administrator find out, your license will be on the line. Basically, this means you cannot in any way earn money from any flights until you have your commercial certificate. To get around this regulation, you may operate for reimbursement of the flight if you have over 200 hours of flight time and it is for charity, and you notify the FAA at least 7 days before the flying. And until you are working on another license other than the PPL, that is all the applicable information in Part 61. Awesome.
In the last 20 minutes-ish, we've gone over the FAR aim, including the structure of how to read this big old book and what sections you needed to read and to be familiar with for your written exam, oral exam, practical exam. And as promised, there's going to be a handful of questions you may or may not see on an FAA written exam or a final exam for a particular online course pertaining to these subjects. Thank you so much for watching episode 5, part 1 of my crash course. It would mean the world to me if you dropped a like and subscribed if you liked the video or any part of it. I wish you all blue skies and tailwinds. Thank you.